Hey guys, and welcome. Whenever there's a discussion about extreme horror movies, someone will bring up what's still considered one of the most controversial, most graphic, and most violent movies ever made, Cannibal Holocaust. Even though the movie was made in 1980, and 55 years later, it still creates heated discussions for a multitude of reasons. There is a lot to cover with this one, but if you are someone who avoids movies which show animal cruelty as well as depict extreme cases of violence, I would honestly skip this one. I recently watched Titane, sorry for butchering that, but needless to say, there's another what the fuck did I just watch coming. But for those of you who haven't seen Cannibal Holocaust, or those of you who have and for some reason want a refresher, let's dive right in. So, Cannibal Holocaust moves into timelines. One takes place in New York, and the other takes place in the Amazon. The film cuts between those worlds to make one point. The camera can turn cruelty into content. And the people holding it may be the real savages. So, for the New York setup, the story opens in 1979. A small American documentary crew has vanished while making a film in the Amazon. Their project carries a title that just signals trouble: The Green Inferno. And their network wants answers because missing filmmakers mean bad press and lost money. A university anthropologist, Harold Monroe, agrees to travel to South America and join a search party. He knows the region and he knows the outsiders can misread a culture. He also knows how outsiders can use a culture. Monroe flies into the jungle and meets men connected to a military outpost and some local guides. The movie frames this phase as an expedition narrative. You get maps, briefings, and you talk about danger. And by this point, I thought the movie looked pretty promising. The acting is good, and it has a relatively solid plot. Although plenty of movies explore the topic of exploitation of populations and how content's being made, this movie was one of the first, I think. So Monroe and the party move by river and by foot. They find traces of the missing crew, and they also find evidence of violence that has nothing to do with the lost Americans. Soldiers have raided villages. People have been taken hostage. Monroe watches the way armed outsiders control the situation through fear. The film builds the idea that civilization arrives with guns, deals, and threats. And as the group pushes deeper, Monroe reaches a village connected to the missing filmmaker's route. He negotiates for information and safe passage. The film uses these scenes to show two kinds of exchange. One is basic trade: food, tools, and a place to rest. And the other is symbolic trade: outsiders offering protection or help in return for control. The mood stays tense as the film wants you to see that the search party's presence carries its own violence. Monroe keeps hearing the same story. The missing crew came through, stirred chaos, and moved on. People describe fires, stage scenes, and provocations. At this stage, the film still lets you hope for a rescue. But pretty shortly, Monroe finds these remains that point toward death. He also begins to suspect that the question is not what happened to them, but rather, what did they do before this happened to them? Also, the cannibalistic tribe, although not particularly friendly, hasn't eaten the anthropologist and his crew, so you start to wonder what went down differently for the first group. Is the anthropologist bound to become their dinner as well? But then you see Monroe back in New York, in one piece, at which point I was wondering if he was gonna go back there and then be eaten by the tribe, but that's my own preconceived notions. Back in New York, executives and producers sit in a screening room and watch the recovered material. Monroe sits with them, and the film becomes a mockumentary nested inside a thriller. You watch people watch a film that pretends to be raw evidence. This structure works really well for the movie. You basically find out what happened to the original crew that vanished at the same time as the producers do. From this point, the story moves forward in the jungle through the crew's footage, in rough chronological order. The picture quality drops. The camera work turns shaky. The filmmakers begin with confident voice. They're in great spirits and are joking around. They talk about how natives are subjects, not people. They chase scenes that would look dramatic back home. They just see this jungle as a set. And here is where one of the most controversial scenes in the movie take place. Multiple animals were killed on camera for the film. Accounts and reference material list killings that include a coati, a large turtle, a tarantula, a snake, a squirrel monkey, and a pig. Sources also note that the monkey killing required more than one take, which meant that more than one monkey died for the scene. None of these scenes used special effects, meaning at least 7 animals lost their lives for this movie, and that's 7 too many. The infamous turtle scene is shown in extreme detail. They're dragging the turtle out of the water, dismembering it, and they're posing with its limbs. It's hard to excuse the director showing this in 1980. If we didn't have the laws protecting animals for such senseless deaths, I'm certain that by then we all knew how wrong this was. It's completely unjustifiable and quite frankly made me feel sick to my stomach. There's no reason whatsoever to be showing this in the movie. It pertained to nothing, it proved no point. Some defenders argue that the production ate the animals and that local people treated certain animals as food. And the director himself made the argument during some interviews, framing the kills as part of survival and part of realism. And he later said that if he could turn back time, he would not have used real animals. Even if you accept that context, the decision to stage and photograph the deaths for entertainment is a choice. The camera turns killing into spectacle. The film then condemns spectacle. It's a contradiction. Something we saw in Men Behind the Sun. As the movie progresses, the footage shows the crew shaping events rather than recording them. They burn structures to film panic. They destroy property so that they can film grief. They talk about getting the shot, the way a hunter talks about tracking an animal. A key turn arrives when the crew clashes with one group and then with another. The film doesn't treat the local tribes as a single mass. It shows different communities with different leaders and customs. The crew flattens those differences because the crew wants a simple story, savages, for Western screens. As the crew runs out of staged material, the footage grows harsher. They begin to treat violence as a tool of production. The film includes series of sexual assaults within the story, filmed as part of the documentary the crew thinks it's making. These moments become a moral line in the footage. Even the crew members who still feel doubt cannot undo what others set in motion. The result is predictable in human terms, even if the movie sells it as shock. The people the crew humiliates and harms strike back. The jungle footage becomes a record of collapse, fear, infighting, flight, and death. The crew tries to escape, but they have burned bridges in every sense. The final images show the camera itself turning into an object on the ground. The screening room returns as the last stage of the plot. Everyone who was present at the viewing looks shocked at what they just watched, at what had transpired in the jungle. Even though they knew the original crew was cocky and that they were risk takers, they would have never guessed that they were so violent, inconsiderate, and honestly, worse than the cannibals. They're also, of course, shocked by the deaths of the crew as well as the suffering they saw them go through. The executives see legal risk and public backlash, so they immediately ask for the tapes to be burned. The film's ending lands on a blunt question. Monroe asks who the real cannibals are. The line does not arrive as a twist. It arrives as an indictment of the viewers in the room. and by extension, the viewers watching the film in the theater. The film's reputation does not rest only on its fiction, however. It rests on what the production did in real life. Besides the animal cruelty, there were also claims of real-life coercion, although the topic needs careful wording, because public discussion mixes documented production conflict with rumor, exaggeration, and misremembered stories. A solid, documented point concerns coercion around sexual content. Reports about the shoot describe intense pressure on performers during nude or sex scenes. One widely repeated account states that actress Francesca Chiardi resisted nudity during a scene and that the director took her away from the set and shouted at her until she agreed to proceed. It also fits older exploitation film production norms, where power sat with the director and producer, not with performer consent. There are also accounts of cast distress during the filming of the staged rape material in the story. Some sources report that actor Carl Gabriel York felt upset and anxious during those sequences. However, we do not know if this refers to the scene at the beginning of the movie, in which a female gets penetrated with a large object, which results in her screaming in pain and bleeding. There's another infamous scene in which the primary group of documentary makers, the ones which vanish, rape a woman from one of the tribes. The woman's fighting back, and Faye, the only woman who's part of the group, tells her friends to stop, but to no avail. This scene goes on for quite a few moments, and is really hard to watch as the perpetrators laugh and completely disregard the women's pleas. Many online discussions state that real sexual assaults took place on set during filming, and some take that as fact, but they tend to rely on second-hand retellings, and not on verifiable documentation. Credible accounts describe coercive and hostile directing practices around nudity and sex scenes, including yelling and intimidation to obtain compliance. Online claims sometimes go further and describe a real sexual assault on set, but those claims don't rest on the same level of documented evidence as the animal killings and the director's documented legal troubles. That may feel unsatisfying if you want a hard answer, but that is the fair answer. And to be fair, the confirmed harms, animal killings, and coercive production conduct already placed the shoot in ethically ugly territory. Another reason the film became notorious is because many viewers believed the deaths looked real. That reaction did not stay at the level of moral panic. It turned into legal problems and public scandal. Contemporary reporting and later retrospectives describe how rumors that the film was a snuff picture drove authorities to take matters seriously. The director used a found footage style before the term became common. He mixed professional cinematography and stage raw material to create a fake artifact. That artifact convinced many people. I think we can all agree that Cannibal Holocaust remains a landmark in a narrow, troubling sense. It helped shape the grammar of found footage, but it also demonstrated how exploitation cinema can borrow the posture of anthropology and journalism while feeding on the same impulses it claims to critique. What's frustrating is that the film's production choices weaken its moral claim. The story condemns sensationalism, yet the production relied on sensational harm that could not be taken back. You can read the film as a warning about media violence and colonial gaze, but you can also read it as an example of those forces at work, captured in the conditions of its own making. I would love to hear your opinions on the movie if you've seen it, or if you have any input in terms of the ethics or lack thereof when talking about Cannibal Holocaust. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please like and or subscribe. I hope to see you in the next one.